Okay, welcome to the two-man game podcast. It is trade deadline day. A ton of stuff went down today. But before we get into it, how was your day today, Davis?
It was very eventful as I've keeping track of all these trades. Pretty crazy. So many trades happened today, and we may not even have enough time to get through all of them. So,
Yeah, so we're definitely not gonna get through all of them. Like even if you exclude yesterday's trade of Durant, there was, if I counted correctly, there was about 15 or 16 trades today. And apparently like every other team has like a handful of second round picks to trade.
it's the first
um
time I've seen so many second round picks traded for one
yeah.
trade.
and there were
Teams trading
teams
three, four, five second round picks.
and there were teams that gave like 4 or 5 second round picks to in one trade, and they took those picks and just traded off like an hour later, like the Hawks and the Warriors that we will get into. But let's just go, man. Let's just jump straight into it. So let's just start off with the biggest trade, right? That happened, yesterday. So not today,
Well,
but
earlier today, like at 1 a.m. Eastern time.
true. So the Kevin Durant trade, right? That so the Suns trade for Kevin Durant literally 12 hours after Matt Ishbia, the new Suns owner slash governor, officially has true ownership of the team. I believe he purchased about 57% ownership of the team for 2 point some odd $billion. Like the franchise was valued at 4 billion, but he bought 57, so he paid 2.2 ish. So the trade for first round picks, a 2028 first round pick swap, which was really smart, and we will talk about why that's smart. Um, Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Drake Crowder, which turned into, I believe it was 4 or 5 second round picks too. So essentially they got, eight or nine picks in totality plus a pick swap and two really good young players. Okay. So Davis, initial thoughts.
This is one of the craziest trades I've seen in some time. Definitely, Suns were a team that were kind of in limbo in a way, where there was a lot of conversations about like, are they going to fall off? Are they still a contender? Are they not a contender? There's a lot of variables to consider with them. CP3, Devin Booker, how Aiden's going to continue to mesh with the team, considering all that drama that happened in the offseason. It was a lot of uncertainty for the Suns team. So adding a player like Kevin Durant, they in a way have like a big three, big four, depending on how you if you consider Aiden to be an all-star player. So, a lot of there's a huge improvement. This drastically shifts the entire league in a way to where the Suns can be potentially seen as the favorites at this point to win the championship. Though there are a lot of other things to consider as well. So we have to kind of see how Durant will fit in the team. And yeah, and whenever Durant comes back from his injury.
Yeah. So on the Sun side, we can talk about the Nets afterwards. So on the Sun side, they definitely have the most top end talent in the West, possibly in the entire league. But I mean, let's just talk about the West for now. So they definitely have the most top end talent. Like their top two, top three, top four players. It's part. It's better than any two-some, threesome, or foursome in any other team in the Western Conference. Um, their depth is a little lacking, but that's not entirely surprising just because you traded essentially three forwards that were starter caliber, if not your starters. Having said that, the depth is not too much of a worry for me, at least not yet, just because even with Durant out, just because the buyout market will have a lot of pretty decent players. So I think we should evaluate the Suns in terms of the roster maybe in like a month after we see what happens with the buyout market. But in terms of the top end talent, definitely has the most in the West. And they also fit well because, you know, Sun the Suns offense is pretty straightforward. It's a lot of pick and roll. a lot of
So
pick and pop, decent amount of ball movement. There's not a lot of ISO, but they play well in the half court. So literally like Durant and Booker, they don't have to do much. They will have their moments where they can ISO or they can do a 2-3 pick and roll if they do start Durant at three. We'll see. And also with Aiden, he's not gonna get that many shots, but he's basically just gonna be a lot of pick and roll action, putbacks, so on and so forth, right? Um, Defensively, they did lose probably one of the best defenders in the league in Bridges. Cam Johnson was pretty decent as well. Having said that, they made up with they more than made up for it with Durant, which is what I don't even have where the Suns rank in offense right now off the top of my head or in front of me right now, but I mean easily they'll probably finish the second half of the year or the last third of the year near the top, if not at the top, right? So um yeah, you can I mean the Suns basically gave up a bit more in terms of value than what the Wolves gave up for Gobert, right? But they got someone who's much better. So I mean,
yeah, uh,
um, yeah.
yeah, it's pretty crazy how much the Wolves were willing to give up for Gobert because I feel like the Wolves probably gave more to the Jazz for Gobert than the Suns did for KD.
So I think this is easily the biggest in terms of ranking in the league. This is probably the biggest trade for someone who's at the level that Durant is currently, right? Because depending on who you ask, he's probably top one, two, three in the league. We've never had a player traded mid-season that's like at the top of the league before, right? None that I could think of.
Yeah, non-recent memory, not that I know of. So I mean, huge impact for the Suns and just the entire league in general, not just the Western Conference, because they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. With
Yeah. Yeah, because over the last like 20 years, the only two trades that really come to my mind that were about players near the top of the league in terms of where they rank. And this is during the offseason, it's not even during the trade deadline, was probably Shaq and Dwight. And maybe Carmelo, but Carmelo was during about around the trade deadline, right? But
yeah, I was about to mention Carmelo. I was like, yeah, well, Carmelo at that time, in the early 2010s, he was one of the top players in the league for sure.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, Darren Williams, like in 2012, but I mean, he was one of the top players, but not the caliber of Durant.
He
And
wasn't a top five player,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
or even top. I mean, Durant's arguably top three. Yeah, so you can make that argument as well.
yeah. So I mean, it's early to say, but I think this might be the biggest trade in history, at least in recent history, just in terms of the level of player that's being traded and the amount that team got back. Right. I mean, I can't think of one off the top of my head in terms of like and because if we just go off of the top, like let's say 15 players, right? So like MJ, Kareem got traded, but the value was nowhere near. Wilt got traded, but the value that the Lakers gave out was nowhere near. I mean, Kobe, no, like Duncan, no, Magic, no, Bird, no, Shaq. We talked about Shaq, Hakeem, no. I mean, like Steph, no. I'm trying to think if there's any
LeBron
trade
technically got traded, but he,
sign trade, right? Yeah,
yeah,
sign trade. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of like a trade that is to this caliber, but
especially midseason.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So before we move on to the Nets impact, would you have the Suns at the top of the West right now? Just in terms of team, like not in terms of finishing at first, but just in terms of like the quality of team.
On paper, I would say yes. But I have yet to see them play together, so it's too early to tell. Right
Mhm.
now, I would still think the Nuggets are the best team in the West.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Let's go on to the Nets. So how do you think the Nets? I mean, I feel I feel like the Nets have done the most packaged trades in like a year span than any team I can ever recall. But overall, how do you think the Nets did in terms of this particular trade package?
For this trade package, I think, well, I mean, it's hard to say, if they would have gotten a better deal elsewhere to some degree, just because, getting 4 first round picks is pretty substantial with the pick swap. So they practically, in a way, have five. Definitely adding a lot of depth to the team and essentially starting a somewhat rebuilding phase, depending on how they want to move forward in the offseason, right? Because currently, the way the team is currently constructed is full of just really solid role players, essentially, that would be key contributors to a championship team. So right now, the Nets kind of remind me of the Jazz prior to their moves this during the trade deadline as well. And where they're not going to contend for a title, but I don't think they're necessarily going to be a bottom team either because it's a team full of really solid players that can
Mhm.
probably win some games. So we'll see what the Nets decide to do. But I think one thing I did want to mention is what they essentially have currently in place. And then also going to mention the impact of Cam Thomas. I'm not sure if this is going to be something similar to Linsanity, where he's having just monster games. But with now that they know that KD is not coming back, he's going to have the opportunity to be a starter. And he's had recently had 3 straight 40-point games. Had a 20-point game tonight against the Magic. So I think his future seems bright based on this very small sample size, but with more space for him and more opportunities for him, we'll see what he can become. But overall, I think the Nets did a great job of getting the best package they could get, I would imagine. And keep in mind that I believe Joe Tsai was also, allowing Kevin Durant to pick his destination, as opposed to with the Kyrie situation, they kind of just forced Kyrie somewhere. And, so I think it was mentioned probably during the offseason or perhaps earlier this year where if KD were to get traded, he would prefer the Suns. And so that's why they kind of forced the deal with the Suns.
Yeah, so let's let's go over the picks first. So the first round picks, pretty self-explanatory. So the reason for me why I also like, so I know that pick swaps get thrown in all the time, and what I really like about the pick swap that the Nets got for 2028 is because even have barring a massive injury, a 2024 pick swap does nothing for you because the Suns will probably be good next year. 2026, maybe they'll still be good, maybe not, but more than likely the Suns will still be better than the Nets. So there's no point to even fight over that pick swap. But being able to get the 2028 pick swap in there, why by then Chris Paul will be retired, and Durant more likely than not will probably be. I mean, LeBron is still great in year 20. By then, that's going to be Durant's year 20. The chances of him still being top tier is it's not it's not low, but it's not as likely, right? So getting that pick swap by 2028, that pick can also be very, very valuable as well,
Yeah.
right? Now in terms of the players that they got back,
We can talk
so
about
they have a ton of wings now. Now they do honestly they have too many wings. Having
yeah.
said all that, the one position that a lot of teams in the league desperately need right now is wings, right? Because almost every team has solid guard play, especially at the point guard position. There's so many teams that need 3-and-D wings or versatile wings, right? You just look at, the Cavs, or you can also look at um the Grizzlies right now, right? Just to name a couple off the top of my head. Um, so I doubt they will keep all these wings on the roster. I think this summer they're definitely going to flip some, right? Just because just going off the roster right now, they have Dwayne Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, um, Bridges, Royce O'Neal, Joe Harris, not a 3D wing, but he's a 3-point shooter who's also a wing. Watanabe as well, right? So, and Cam Thomas is more of a shooting guard, but they have so many wings on the roster, and all of them are star caliber, more or less. Maybe a couple are like Watanabe is more like a bench player, but like for the most part, all these guys are star caliber, right? Some even potentially have low level all-star potential as well, like Bridges, right? So I'm surprised that they didn't do a swap besides Crowder of these wings, over the last 24 hours, but probably they just didn't have enough time. But I fully expect that this summer that they will trade at least a couple of these guys because they have so many, and especially for teams that are contending, like the top tier teams, you can never have enough 3D wings, right? So in terms of that, I think the Nets did as best they could because they can't blow it up, right? They can't tank because they don't have first round picks because Houston has all of them, right? So they have to be incentivized to stay relevant. I think with the amount of talent that they have, they could probably still make the bottom end of the playoffs. Um, Having said that, for a franchise to have one, two, three, four, let's say four, because technically you traded a big package for Harden. You traded a package, you received a package for Harden too. You to have four massive trade packages over the last 2 years, three in the last year. It's insane, right? So I'm personally hoping that that the Nets just kind of like develop their young core, don't go for home runs, because that's how they became relevant in the first place, right? They were developing players in 2017, 2018, 2019. That's how they became relevant in the first place, right? So, but overall, I mean, I feel like they got the best deal possible. I mean, I feel like if there was a bidding war for Durant, it'd be hard for a different team to outbid this, right?
Yeah,
So
well, at the same time, Durant wanted to go to the Suns as well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they kind of had to force that trade. And kind of what I mentioned earlier, that depends on what the Nets want to do. Because since there isn't an incentive for them to tank, like as you mentioned, they have way too many wings. A lot of quality wings though. Most of these guys can fit into most teams because 3-and-D wings are one of the most valuable types of players in the modern day NBA. So I think what's interesting is they traded Royce O'Neal. They got Royce O'Neal from the Jazz for a first round pick, hoping to contend, and now he's just kind of there, and they just gave him a first round pick. But I guess
Yeah.
it is what it is at that point. But yeah, they can definitely move the players they have, like especially with the Cam Johnson, Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith, or whoever is least impactful on the team based on whatever is left in the regular season to determine who they want to move and who's going to stay and things along those lines.
Yeah. So last point about the wings before we move on. Depending on what happens in the playoffs, right? Let's say the Cavs, the Sixers, the Grizzlies. I mean, the Mavs already traded one away, but the Mavs, um, Pelicans, the Heat, I guess too. Like all these teams who need more 3D wings or versatile wings, if they don't perform well in the playoffs, feel like the Nets are the team that they're gonna discuss, right? If you could have Cam Johnson in Cleveland, or if you have Cam Johnson like replacing Dylan Brooks in Memphis, like there are so many possibilities, and there's so many ways for the Nets to not only get more picks, but also potentially get more, just just consolidate players, right? But man,
Trade for a
okay,
big or something.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
believe in Nick Claxton.
yeah. Okay, so before we move on, last question about this trade. What would you do with Ben Simmons?
That is an interesting question, and to be honest, I don't think they can do anything with Ben Simmons. Based on a report that I read, he apparently doesn't have any trade value. I think primarily due to his contract and his play. Though I mean, he's averaging a ton of assists like he normally does,
Mm-hmm.
but he just can't score the ball whatsoever. And in today's NBA, you have a guard who can't shoot. That is you're not going to survive very long in the league. And he
Okay.
lost his defensive touch as well. So I mean, he used to be at the very least he was an elite defender, and he's
Mm-hmm.
lost that. So I'm not sure what they can do. He's getting paid like around 30 something million, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. He's getting paid
37 million. Geez.
37, almost 38 this for next year, and 40 million the year afterwards. This year it's 35.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if they should like waive or and you do this. Was it the stretches contract out so they pay less and it takes less of a
Yeah.
salary cap hit. But since
Yeah.
the contracts in the league are guaranteed, they're kind of stuck with them, or they're gonna have to buy them out or something. Because I'm not sure what kind of value he can add, but we'll see. I think we should give him a chance. Now that he doesn't have that pressure, um, to win. We'll see what he can do with this current group of players. Because I still imagine he's going to get playing time because they gave up a decent amount for him. They're paying him a ton of money, so unless he's still terrible. Um,
I would argue is that I don't think there's a lot of playing time for him. So especially
20
if
minutes a game. I mean, or something along. I know he's not playing too much, but
I don't even think he can play 20 minutes a game. Like, so assuming that the Nets re-sign Cam Johnson, assuming that they re-sign Cam Johnson, right? And
right.
assuming that they don't trade Dinwiddie, Ben, at best, Ben can only play backup point, right? Because you have Bridges, you have Cam Johnson, you have Cam Thomas, you have Dwayne Finney-Smith, you have Steph Curry, you have Harris, you have Watanabe. And Ben at center did not do well at all this entire season. You have so many perimeter players that you're not gonna have Ben on the perimeter because you have so many, frankly, better players on your roster that are better playing on the perimeter, defense and offense. So at best, you might have him as a backup point, which at most 15 minutes a game at best.
Well, we're gonna
Um,
have to see. I mean, I just can't. I mean, like unless they're doing they're giving him the John Wall treatment. I feel like just because of the amount they've invested in him, like a lot of teams are still going to play that inefficient player, even though
yeah.
this person may not be the best fit for basketball.
So question. So Bridges is on a reasonable contract. Cam Thomas is still early in his rookie contract. Excuse me. Dwayne Finney-Smith is also on a very, very reasonable contract. The cap is supposed to increase in about, I believe, in 2 seasons from now. Is it crazy? I mean, I think there's like a 20% chance that this happens. There's not very high likelihood, but if you decide that you want to give that playing time to your other young talent, do you stretch Simmons? So basically, for those who don't know, when you do a stretch provision on a player, you basically take his contract and you do a you you double the length of his contract plus one. So okay, example. Um, if a player has $50 million on his contract for 2 years, you basically stretch that 50 million into 5 years. So you double the amount of time on his contract. So 2 years becomes four plus an extra year. So that's 5 years. And instead of paying him 25 million for 2 years, you pay 10 million for 5 years. That's basically what the stretch provision is. Simmons has $78 million left on his contract after this year. So if you were to stretch him, you would basically be paying 15 million and change for the next 5 years. That might sound like a lot, but if you're the Nets, you're not going to be a championship team relatively anytime soon. You have very controllable contracts. No one's really that expensive besides Simmons. And the cap is also going up in a couple of years. So is it out of the realm of possibility that you would stretch provision him? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think it depends on the situation and if they feel strongly about someone, right? Though I don't know. I would say yes now that I think about it, because even if you were to stretch, you'll open some cap space to re-sign these players whenever their contract expires, right? And since a lot of these guys that they do have, they're all valuable players, right? In most on most teams, and so they're gonna have value regardless. As long as they don't vastly overpay someone, I think that person is gonna have whoever it may be. That
Yep.
person's gonna have some trade value of some kind, so you realistically can still move the player.
Yep. I would I would agree that the stretch provision might be a good option, but not for this Nets management. So what I mean by that is if you look at the GMs or the basketball ops people in Miami, in Memphis, they they know how to do deal constructions and how to cap manage so well where they so just for example, right, for like Memphis, other than Jaw, a lot of the contracts that they give out to even Jaren and to Brooks, they're all descending contracts. So they are able to project 2, 3, 4 years in the future how much cap space that they have. So they can and so whenever every summer, that's why you see Memphis, trading away Melton or whatnot, right? Because they are able to make those in between moves that make sure that they don't exceed the cap because they can't because they're a small market team, right? So Miami does something very similar. So they know how to work the cap very well. The Nets, from what we have seen, they just go after stars. So I don't trust the Nets to do it well. But if you have a basketball ops team that knows how to manipulate the cap well, knows how to structure contracts for players that doesn't impede your ability to have flexibility with signings and trades, then I think the stress provision could potentially be a good option. But for this Nets organization and Sean Marks, I have not seen them manipulate and construct their team and know how to create contracts that allow them that type of flexibility. So that's probably the best way that I can answer this question.
I guess that's true, but I mean, I would still. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't know. Objectively, I think that's probably going to be the best bet for them because I mean, his minutes have, as you mentioned earlier, have dwindled. I just feel like they're going to play him regardless, just because they pay him so much money. And I'm not saying he's going to get a majority of the minutes, and not even as a starter, but like when you pay someone so much money, it's kind of like with the Lakers and Westbrook
Good point.
prior to the trade or even prior to this season, like last season, right? It's like obviously he's super extremely inefficient as a starter, yet they still start him. I
Yeah.
mean, to be fair, I don't know who else would have played in his place, but still, like pretty sure anyone else would have been more efficient.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.